William Lane Craig is a Christian apologist who a while ago was on the Reasonable Faith podcast, and the host brought up antinatalism. Now, it goes without saying that what William Lane Craig came up with in his response to antinatalism was god-awful, and in this video I want to go through it and rebut what he says. Having said that, I'm not going to go through the whole clip because it would make for a very long video, so I've only selected certain things to respond to. If you want to see the whole video, there's a link in the description. You can watch it all in its full glory. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into it.
The rise of antinatalism. Now you can see from the title there what that is, and that is we need to quit having children because we are polluting the planet and the earth needs to return back to its pristine condition of not having people on it because we've messed it up. The antinatalist. So the adherents of this, according to the article, view life not as a gift and a miracle, but a harm and an imposition. And their notion that having children may be a bad idea seems to be gaining mainstream popularity.
Now, it's interesting here, they've mentioned two types of antinatalism, and I want to explain the distinction between them a bit more than what they've done there, because I think it's important. So they've touched on here one form of antinatalism, which is more of the voluntary human extinction brand. Maybe the most well-known advocate for that is Les Knight. This form of antinatalism focuses on the external harms that humans do. So if you bring a human into existence, they will cause environmental degradation, they will cause harm to the planet, to the other species on the planet, and therefore we should cease reproduction and allow other animals to take back the earth and for the earth and the biosphere to rejuvenate after humans have gone away. Now, this is not personally my flavor of antinatalism. I go for the second type that they mentioned more, which is the view that procreation generally is unethical because bringing someone into existence is a harm. And that's a more universal type of antinatalism. And it doesn't focus on the harm that someone would do if they're brought into existence, but it focuses on the harm that would be done to them by being brought into existence. Now, interestingly, that does overlap with the environmental argument in a way, because bringing someone into existence in a world where there is colossal environmental degradation, and as a result the biosphere and all of the other natural systems that we rely on are degraded, then obviously that's going to have implications for the person you're bringing into existence. And so one of the harms, or one of the subsets of harms that you can impose on someone or expose them to if you bring them into existence, is the harm caused by environmental degradation. So there is a bit of overlap there, but one of them focuses on the harm done to the being you're creating, and the other one focuses on the harm being done by the being you're creating.
And then they talk about Raphael Samuel, who has kind of coined the phrase antinatalist. He believes it's wrong to bring new people into the world without their consent.
Just very quickly before we go on here, I actually don't think Raphael Samuel did coin the term antinatalism. He probably became the most well-known proponent of it overnight when he launched the stunt that they're about to talk about. But I don't think he coined the term itself. I think it's disputed as to whether David Benatar or Théophile Diderot coined it in 2006 when they both published works on the topic and both used the term. But anyway, we'll get back to what they were saying.
And he was going to sue his parents for begetting him. It was not our decision to be born, he told the BBC. Human existence is totally pointless.
Now, again, very quickly, before I actually get into what they're saying, if you want to see an interview with Raphael Samuel about all of his escapades with threatening to sue his parents, I've got an interview with him on my channel. I'll link it in the description if you want to watch it.
He said.
Yes. Now there, Kevin, we see the atheistic underpinnings of antinatalism, don't we? I've argued extensively that if God does not exist, then life is indeed absurd, without ultimate meaning, value, or purpose. And these antinatalists, I think, presuppose the truth of atheism and therefore think that life is utterly pointless and that it's therefore immoral to impose such a pointless existence upon another creature.
So there's two things I want to say here. The first is about this idea that, life is pointless and that informing antinatalism. That may be a part of certain people's antinatalist views, the idea that ultimately there is no cosmic meaning in the world and there's no ultimate point to this, and so why are we creating new people to impose suffering on them? What is the greater purpose that we can point to? There is none, and so this sort of existential nihilism informs their antinatalist view. But that's not necessarily all antinatalists. There may be some antinatalists who do think that there is some sort of wider meaning to the universe. They just don't think that it is worth imposing suffering on someone else, for example. But the pointlessness of our ultimate existence as a species is not necessarily part of antinatalism. The second thing I want to say is this idea that antinatalists are just heathens, and this is where being an atheist gets you. The first thing to say is the vast majority of atheists aren't antinatalist. But another thing to say is that you can actually get to antinatalism easier on a religious worldview in some instances. And there have been many religious sects throughout history that have actually informed their antinatalist views with their religious views. Now, I'll pop up a few examples on screen now, but the most well-known are the Gnostics, and even more well-known perhaps are the Skoptzes. So this idea that antinatalism is generated by some degenerate atheist worldview is just not the case. Most atheists aren't antinatalist, and there are religious antinatalists. Just one example of how you can get to an antinatalist conclusion on a religious worldview: if your religion says that there is a hell, why would you want to risk putting someone through eternal torment in hell? It's one thing to be an atheist and think, I'm going to create someone and I will impose the harm of their life on them, but once they're dead, they're dead. Now, I still disagree with that, but imagine you're in a religious worldview and you think, okay, I'm going to bring someone into existence and that's going to impose the harms of life on them, but if they don't tread carefully, they could end up in eternal torment in hell. That's a whole nother level of imposition that you've just put someone on there, and the risk of extreme suffering that you've signed them up for.
He says that life, even under the best of circumstances, is not a gift or a miracle, but rather a harm and an imposition. According to this logic, the question of whether to have a child is not just a personal choice, but an ethical one. And the answer is always no.
Yes.
So
I think what that would imply, Kevin, that would imply that the human race ought to go extinct in one generation, that no one should procreate, no one should have children, and that therefore the current generation of children is the last that will ever exist. The human race should go extinct in one generation.
So yes, I actually have a video coming out on this at some point in the future, which I will link in the end cards and in the description once it's out. But whilst I don't think that extinction is a goal of antinatalism, or it necessarily has to be a goal for antinatalists, if antinatalism were to be fully realized, then voluntary human extinction very likely would result. Now, they haven't actually said a reason why that would be bad. They do get onto that later in the video, so I'll respond to it then. But another nuance or wrinkle to this is they claim that antinatalists would want extinction to happen in one generation. No antinatalist who at least has a semblance of an accurate understanding of reality is going to think that humanity will go extinct in one generation. Even if antinatalism is extremely successful and it catches on and everyone adopts it, this will happen in a phased way, and humanity will be able to be considered about how we go extinct. If we all sign up to the same idea, then we can coordinate how we want to do this. Of course, there will be a last generation and there will be some burden attending their dying out, but there's always going to be a last generation. Humanity is not going to exist forever. At some point there will be a last generation. Do we want to have control over how that happens and when that happens, or don't we? But anyway, they do come up with some thoughts later, so we'll get into that then.
Obviously, Bill, one of the reasons this is probably going mainstream is it's in the context of what everybody's upset about these days. Global warming, climate change, and so on. And so this is your way of protesting.
Yes, and some of them do seem to have an antinatalism that is born out of not ethical concerns, but rather these practical concerns, that the planet is warming, the future is bleak. There are probably thousands of terrified children who think that their generation is the last because of climate change. And so some of these antinatalists are arguing that it's wrong to bring kids into a world like that.
So climate change and environmental degradation is a topic of particular focus at the moment for understandable reasons. But a point I want to make is that we should not unduly restrict our focus on the harms of coming into existence to environmental harms. They are one subset of the harms that someone will be exposed to. But the imposition of death, the risk of disease, bereavement, poverty, war, depression, anxiety, all the bads in life are the things that someone will or could be harmed by coming into existence. I see no reason to unduly restrict our analysis of the harms of coming into existence to purely environmental ones. But I agree with them. It could be the case that antinatalism will have a rise in popularity as a result of people having concerns around procreation because of the situation of the environment. But I just want to make the point that generally we should not restrict our analysis of the harms of coming into existence specifically to environmental harms.
In 2006, the South African philosopher David Benatar wrote a book which is widely credited as introducing the term antinatalism in Better Never to Have Been, The Harm of Coming into Existence. Benatar quotes, the Greek tragedian Sophocles, never to have been born is best, but if we must see the light, the next best is quickly returning whence we came.
Yeah, it is such a dark view of life because it draws out the logical consequences of atheism. And in one sense, what we ought to say to these people is, yes, given your worldview, given the denial of the existence of God, the world is a very bleak place. And invite them to think again about whether or not maybe God really does exist and life does have meaning and purpose and value.
So antinatalism is not the view that life has no meaning. Once someone exists, they can find great meaning in a whole variety of things in life. Pursuing some great achievement or helping others or nurturing deep relationships with other individuals. These are all things that we can find great meaning in. And antinatalism has nothing to say about any of these, whether they're good or bad once we exist. Antinatalism is specifically a view about whether we should bring people into existence. But having said all that doesn't mean that there is general cosmic meaning that would then perhaps compel us to bring new people into existence. But having said that, even if there was some form of cosmic meaning that someone believed in, that wouldn't necessarily inform a pro-natalist view. That wouldn't necessarily mean that you'd want to or you should bring someone into existence as a new person who will then need meaning. If you don't bring someone into existence, there is no one to need or want that meaning in their lives.
Benatar is discouraging reproduction, and these guys are saying don't have children and so on. And the strain that I hear as well, Bill, is because we need to turn the world back into its beautiful, pristine place. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Now, what's incoherent about it is that who's going to be there to see how wonderful it is? You can't observe the wonder of it. You can't enjoy what you've accomplished.
Right.
And all that's going to be left is some cockroaches and lizards, and you're sacrificing your humanity and the human race so that they can scurry around.
So again, I want to say this is not my flavor of antinatalism, but I want to step into the shoes of the people whose view it is, because I think these guys are completely unduly anthropocentric in their view on this. Now, to reiterate this view comes from the idea that humans are imposing a harm or a burden on the environment and the animals in the environment, and that humans should go extinct so that the animals in the environment, the non-human animals, can then benefit from the biosphere and the earth returning to its natural state. So these two guys are completely and unduly anthropocentric in their analysis here. They assume humans are the only individuals, the only beings who can appreciate the natural world or find value in things, but they're not. Non-human animals are also sentient. They can also find value in certain things, and they can also appreciate the natural world. Now, where I differ here and where I'm going to step out of the shoes of arguing for this position is that I actually don't think the natural world is a very good place. I don't think the lives of wild animals are extremely good. And so wild animals are suffering at the moment, and they will suffer if humans go extinct, or they'll continue to suffer if humans go extinct. But what I wanted to point out here is that these two gentlemen are being completely and unduly anthropocentric in their view and disregarding the interests of non-human animals, where I don't think that it's warranted.
Yeah, they haven't weighed, I think, properly in their minds the great goods that would be given up in the human race going extinct, such as aesthetic and cultural and moral achievements. The world has far more goods in it than it does evil. Otherwise, everyone would commit suicide. But they don't. People generally think life is worth living, and when things are going rough, they hope for the future, that things will improve. So on balance, there's much more good in life than bad. And they would rob us of all of that by saying that we should all go extinct. And there goes all of the art, all of the music, the dance, all of these cultural achievements. It all goes out the window.
So, of course, no one would be deprived of any of these good things if we ceased procreating and humanity went voluntarily extinct that way, because no one would be in existence, in terms of humans that is, to want to have any of these things or need to appreciate any of these things. If I give an applied example, if I have a companion animal, a dog, right, and on their birthday I make them a birthday cake that has all the ingredients that are appropriate for a dog, and my dog really enjoys this birthday cake, that's clearly a good thing. And if I weren't to do this for my dog, they would obviously be deprived of that. But if I had simply not asked a breeder to breed a dog into existence, then that dog just simply wouldn't exist to want or need or be deprived of that birthday cake. There would not be some great loss in the fact that there is no dog in existence for me to make a birthday cake for. There is no dog being harmed by the fact that they are not having a birthday cake. Likewise, there is no human in existence, if we cease procreating, to be harmed or deprived by the fact that they aren't appreciating works of art or going on walks in the mountains or having deep relationships with people. Another thing I want to note on is that he says that people would just take their own lives if life was that bad. Of course, this isn't always the case. Some people do take their own lives if life gets bad enough, but there are a few other things to say here. The first thing is that evolution over millions of years, billions of years, has built into us this will to continue living. Obviously, this has been selected for because if we were just to give up and end our own lives at the first sign of any hardship, we would not live long enough to reproduce. So clearly evolution is selected for the fact that we will have this strong will to continue existing to get us through hard times so that we will reproduce and spread our genes. Another thing to take into account is that there can be different thresholds between starting a life and continuing a life. When you already exist, again, you have interests, relationships to maintain, obligations you have to weigh the goods and the bads in your life, and you can make a decision for yourself whether you want to continue existing. But when someone's deciding whether to create someone or not, there are none of these pre-established interests or desires that they need to balance against the harms that will be imposed on that person if they decide to create them.
The funny thing is, and I want to make this clear, I don't think anyone is obligated to have children. If a couple chooses not to have children, that's their personal choice. And I don't see why she has to justify her personal choice by turning it into an ideology which would impose that choice on everyone else and all of humanity.
The first thing I want to say is when it's someone else's idea that you disagree with, it's always an ideology. I could just as easily respond to his Christian beliefs as saying, why do you need to turn your obsession with an imaginary friend into this ideology and impose it on all of us? Now, just going back, they were talking about a specific antinatalist, and I don't know what her views are, so I'm just going to talk generally. And I want to make it clear that antinatalism itself is not an ideology that wants to impose non-reproduction on others. All that antinatalism generates is a voluntary decision not to procreate and not to cause other sentient beings to come into existence. Now, obviously, like many other ideas, it has proponents that are more authoritarian, but antinatalism itself is not an authoritarian thing. If you want to get into this more, I've actually made a video on misconceptions that people have about antinatalism, which I'll link in the description.
Bill, it gets pretty complicated here. She says that there's a rift between the vegan antinatalist and the non-vegan antinatalist. The non-vegan antinatalist, they want animals around because they need to eat them.
Yeah, put them out of existence. Eat them.
Yeah.
Now, the first thing I want to say here is that I just find it completely scummy to watch William Lane Craig here as one of the people who is very likely paying for these animals to be brought into existence and supporting the idea that animals are commodities that we should bring into existence or that we can bring into existence for our own benefit, and then laughs about the fact that the misery we've brought them into, let's just relieve them of their misery by killing them. This just smacks me of a guy who doesn't take ethics at all seriously and is completely callous to the suffering of others, that he has put them into the position they are in and they lead much worse lives than he does, and all he can do is laugh about it. The second thing I want to say is that antinatalism is concerned with the starting of lives, not the ending of lives. Again, I've already spoken about this a bit and I've done a video on this more in depth. If you want to watch that, it's on screen now, and I've also put a link in the description. Now, another thing I want to touch on is why there's a dispute between vegan and non-vegan antinatalists. Now, I have done a video on this about why animals are included in antinatalism, which again I'll link in the description, but the general idea is that for the same reasons that we view humans as being harmed by coming into existence and that it's then wrong to create them, those same reasons actually apply to non-human animals as well. Non-human animals can be harmed, they can suffer, and so bringing them into existence is also a harm and can be even more of a harm than bringing humans into existence if the non-human animal is going to live a much worse life than a human, which most of them do. And as a result, we have an equal commitment to not reproducing and creating new humans as we do to not creating non-human animals as well. And this is where the veganism comes from, because if someone's an antinatalist and they don't want to reproduce, and they also have this duty to not create other sentient beings, they will refrain from participating in the industries that create other animals, one of those being animal agriculture, and so they're vegan. They practice veganism in their personal lives.
Bill, I guess in conclusion today, perhaps this is a good opportunity for the gospel among a growing movement of antinatalists, that life is worth living.
Very hopeless.
Yeah. And perhaps we can offer them some hope, and that good solid philosophy and theology from a Christian view on who humans are and what humanity is all about and what community is all about, and do away with all the sadness.
So that's the end of their clip. All I want to say is that life can be worth continuing, and I hope for everyone watching it is, and they are in a situation where their life is enjoyable, but that doesn't mean that it's worth starting. Being an antinatalist also doesn't mean that you're depressed or that you lack a community, and it doesn't mean that you need to go to a happy clappy church and pray to the supreme overlord that created this whole mess in the first place. Anyway, let me know what you thought of William Lane Craig's thoughts. Let me know what you thought of my response, and I will see you in the next one.